I think we all agree the New Orleans Saints heavy lifting this offseason to keep building around Tyler Shough. So with 3 weeks left to go to the draft, think, hey, let's build the depth chart the best we can of the available roster and see where we are, which confirms, unfortunately, two spots on the offense that we knew needed help, and a couple spots on the defense that we're going to have to take care of also. So let's take a look at those depth charts. I'm Tim. Let's talk Saints. So trying to throw together a depth chart for the offense, just focused on who I think the starters are going to be and primary backups or contributors. So not everybody on the roster currently is on this depth chart right now, but we'll probably talk about some of them at some point. And really, right now, the main focus is going to be on the three rooms that on the offensive side are pretty stable and don't necessarily need a lot of help right away. And the most stable is the quarterback room. We decided to go, and rightfully so, all in on Tyler Shough in 2026. So there's really no need in bringing in another young quarterback, even if there was one available. Because as it stands, Rattler's going to be a backup, and I think right now that's his floor in the NFL. He still needs some development, but I think, especially with the quarterback gurus we have on the staff, starting with the head coach, they can get him up to a Chase Daniels, maybe even a Teddy Bridgewater type backup situation through development. That would be incredible, and I think he can do it. And then they brought in another veteran quarterback in Zach Wilson. There was quite a few to choose from out there. I'm not sure why they chose him or if I would have done it, but that's where we are. But the key here is bringing in that third kind of veteran, been around the NFL quarterback for the reason that if the rumors are true about teams being interested in Rattler, and I'm not saying that they are or not, but if they are, you want to be ready that if somebody throws that offer at you and you just can't refuse it and you're going to trade Rattler, you have a backup plan already in place, knowing that Wilson gets his shot and you're probably at that point going to dip back into the veteran free agent pool and get another Zach Wilson type quarterback to also compete for the job. But overall, you don't really need to do a lot of this room. The main thing you need to do is keep developing your top two quarterbacks. You get Wilson in the mix. And most importantly, keep building a team around them because all three of them need improvements on this offense. And that brings us to the running back room. Signing Achan in the free agency. I'm still struggling not to call him ATN, but I'm going to keep trying. But bringing him in free agency, he's here to be the starter. He's a three down back. He was a when Jacksonville was right offensively, he was very, very good. And I feel confident in the fact that what we're doing this offseason and the coaching staff we have in place, our offense is going to be right too this year. Right behind him, Estime and Neal, I think, are a really good young combination. Estime, really hard downhill runner, hard to tackle, with some straight line speed. Once he gets going downhill, he's a handful to deal with, and he can catch the ball coming out the backfield. Neal excelled in the passing game last year in his limited time, not only catching the ball, but in his protection. And when he was handed the ball, he showed a running back that has real good vision, real good cutting ability, can operate in tight spaces because that's all our blocking was given him last year. He was able to hold his own there. So I think you're really good with those two. Question comes in, what happens with Alvin? That's a little uncertain right now, but if he comes back, he's your fourth running back, and Miller's injury history works against him. You brought Chandler in. I think he's kind of an emergency option just to make sure you have a full room. And we still have Hall. God love him. Every time he stepped on the field last year when we needed him to, he's a wide open 110% max effort player all the time. I just don't think he can make this roster, but I really do appreciate him as a football player. So your running back room is good. The decision on Alvin is going to affect it somewhat, but I think at the high end, the top three, you're fine. And tight end is stable. Juwan Johnson coming off a very good year in this offense. Want him to keep getting better, obviously. We signed Noah Fant, who we wanted last year as tight end too. So 1 and 2 is pretty much in the books on what we're going to do. Leaves three other tight ends currently on the roster. Seventh round pick last year, Mataval, Trayton Welch, who's been around for a couple of years, and Mitchell Payton, um, player we picked up, I believe it was from Baltimore's practice squad during the course of the season. All three of them played during the course of the season, especially when we had some injury issues stacking up a tight end later in the year. So I think you're really good there. I don't know if you're perfect. That is a room where I can see on day two, day three of the draft, you may be adding a player. And this is a good draft for tight ends. Obviously, you have Sadiq at the top. You have Stowers. Sounds like top day two guy a lot of people are expecting, but you've got Claire from Ohio State, injuries from Texas. You can look in the day three. Borkircher, I think, is the best blocking tight end in this draft, and he may be of real interest for us. But he also has ability to catch the ball. There's probably about 10 total tight ends that, after Sadiq in the first round, from round 2 to round 4 ish, could be available options for the Saints if they want to add to this room. And I don't want to say necessarily better than the three that we already have behind Johnson and Fant, but definitely would be able to compete. And in the case of some of them, it's it's pretty much widely accepted that as rookies, they'll be able to come in and step on the field and contribute in some way, shape, or form as a tight end. Maybe not tight end one or two, but three or four, they would be in the loop. So now that we've gotten those three out the way, this is the one we all know. Wide receiver is an issue. And as I was trying to construct this depth chart, it dawned on me that it was probably, or more definitely, an issue bigger than I was initially given it credit for. And then offensive line, we've had an improvement there in the offseason just by the addition of Edwards at left guard, but we still have some question marks there. Obviously, we're going to have to deal with. So let's go ahead and break down. These are a little more in depth than the quarterback, running back, tight end rooms. So let's go ahead and break each one down individually. So when you start with the wide receiver room, there's a lot on the top and not much underneath. Olave's going to be wide receiver one. Vele setting up to be wide receiver two, and I think you're very good in both spots right now. When you get to wide receiver three is when things kind of become a question mark. These are the common names that you kind of seeing right now when people are talking about who's up next after Olave and Vele. Tipton, Austin, and Polk. Now, Tipton and Austin, to me, are the opposite sides of the same coin in a way because they've both been here 2 years. Tipton showed up as an undrafted free agent, got a lot of speed, was doing great things in camp, and then again last year in camp. But when the season rolled around, just didn't see the production out of him. And he was technically wide receiver three 2 years ago and became wide receiver three last year after we shook up the receiving core with some moves. Never really have seen the production. He's been given some chances. Now, all fairness to him, when we gave him a shot at kick return, he looked pretty good there, and that may still be the best path for him to be productive on this team and maybe be the last receiver to make the 53 man as 5 or 6, however many we're taking. But as one of the main guys, I'm just we've been waiting and we haven't seen it. Whereas Austin Jr. for those 2 years was almost as an afterthought. In both 24 and 25 until late in the season, we started losing receivers and were desperate for help. Both years he showed up and, in my opinion, played very well. Made plays for the quarterbacks that were out there when they were begging anyone to go out there and catch passes and gain yards and move the chains and score touchdowns. He did that, finishing strong 2 seasons in a row. So I would really like for him, of the receivers we're talking about here, get a legitimate shot to see what he can do as far as making this roster and how far up the depth chart he can get, and not just have him hanging out like we did the last 2 years, waiting to the end of the season going, oh crap, we need some bodies. Let's put Austin Jr. back in there and watch him play well again for the third year in a row. I'd like to start off there. Now, Polk didn't play last year, and we're going to go on to some of those guys in a minute. But look, we traded for him last year knowing he wasn't going to play. And I think knowing we were going to be in the position where of the three amigos we started last year, wide receivers 1, 2, 3, probably only one of them was going to be here in 2026, and it's probably going to be Chris Olave. It's kind of the way it turned out. So he was more of a long term move when we made that trade. So he's going to be given a shot. There's no doubt about it. What he's going to bring, we don't know. It's a big gigantic question mark at this point. So that's going to bring us to add two players that did play at the very end of last year, got in game 17. Bell made a fantastic catch down in the red zone from Tyler Shough. Torrey contributed in that game also. You have to recognize they were around at the end of the year. They were kind of part of what was going on. And, much like we were talking about Kevin Austin, injuries started stacking up. Guys had to go out there and make plays, and they did. So the consideration is there, kind of knowing what you have. But is anybody comfortable so far with this list? Because I can find some comfort in Austin Jr., but not a whole lot of comfort and confidence in everybody else. And there's still a few more receivers hanging around on the roster. So now we move on to four guys that didn't play at all last year. Now, Palmer and Means were due to injury also, like Polk. I don't know how much they're factoring into things, but assuming Palmer, this is another one we brought in last year, knowing he was injured, is going to be given his shot. Means I have liked everything I've ever seen for him in his career with the Saints. Just unfortunately, he keeps having these dreadful season-ending injuries 2 years in a row. And ultimately, I don't know how that's going to end up working out for him. Cook and Alford, we've added, haven't seen anything from them at all as far as what they can do on the roster, but they're here. They're going to be in the mix. So when it comes down to that's what you're looking at right there next to me on the screen. 1 and 2, I'm very pleased with, and I expect big things out of both of them. And then all of a sudden you get to 3. Never mind 4, 5, and possibly 6. And if it's 6 deep, there's a good chance whoever that 6th one is will probably factor into or have a good chance to factor in the return game. So Tipton might squeeze in at that point. But you're looking for 2 to 3 names out of that group, and I just don't see how you're thinking, or anyone is thinking, that, hey, yep, this is good. We don't need to do anything. As I went through this and all the both sides of the ball and started trying to put these depth charts together and talking about each room, this is the one that scares me the most because of that. And there's one other on this team that's also scary, but not quite like this is. When you're looking at this draft, especially, first round, Tate and Lemon, who are both significantly known that the Saints have shown interest in them, at least so far in the pre-draft process. Then Tyson, which haven't heard anything, but got to believe they're at least on the radar, and they're looking into that possibility. After 8, you get into a list of guys late first to second round, including Omar Cooper, Denzel Boston, Casey Concepcion, and Chris Bell, who we've definitely shown some interest in, bringing him in for a top 30. Outside of those guys, there's still a very strong list of day 2 guys, second, and some of them will probably slip into the third round. And this list includes, but not all of them. There's even some that are going to make this list that I'm not mentioning right now. But when you're talking about Jeremy Bernard, Elijah Surratt, Skylar Bell, Bryce Lance, Zachariah Branch, Ted Hurst, who Ryan Fowler did report, I think it was last week on Twitter, that he was having a top 30 visit with the Saints. You're talking like guys like that. That's all good football players. And everybody I just named, plus some of the ones that I just, for brevity's sake, didn't go all the way down the list of potential guys on that third tier, which they're going to be drafted by the third round. Almost everyone on that list, when I'm looking at that, you have to bring somebody in. It's a priority that at least one, and you're probably not going to double dip, but grabbing one of these guys at this level is going to be as good or better than most of that list right there. So to me, the bottom line is when you're looking at receiver, and this is why it's, in my mind, it's a priority, You have to, whether it's number 8, number 42, number 73, or you decide to do what the Saints love to do, trade up somewhere in that process. But starting with Tate, Lemon, and Dyson coming all the way down to, and I hate to use the phrase bottom of the list because I think they're still really good football players that could help. But when you start getting down to the guys like Branch and Hurst, yeah, you can't wait around for day 3. Something has to be done here. There's some really good football players, some really good receivers that are going to impact this team on that list. There's no doubt in my mind. And to me, the priority is number 1 is to make sure you get somebody off that list and have them in the building by round 3 at the latest. Because after that, it's a good chance all bets are off and you just may be high and dry in the whole situation. No visual on the second priority to me coming from the offense is the offensive line. The visual that I have in my mind, there's actually 2 of them going back a couple of years when Drew Brees was still our quarterback. One is Aaron Donald smashing through, I believe it was Andrews Pete, to crunch Drew and basically injure his thumb, where we lost him for quite a few games. And the other one is the San Francisco defensive lineman, whose name I don't care to remember, roughing Drew illegally and ended up not puncturing a lung, collapsing a lung in the process, and we lost Drew for a couple of weeks. So that's why I've been harping, bring it up again, the interior of that offensive line, because that's the scary spot for me. As we mentioned earlier, you got Edwards, great job there, and that solves a lot of issues. But I still think on the interior, you've got some work to do. Now, one, the obvious one is we have not been able to get McCoy through a full season 2 years in a row. It bit us in 24, except for the brief period of time where we went get a center, which McGivern, I'm sorry, I forget his name right at the moment, off of the Jets practice squad. He came in, played for McCoy, and stabilized the offensive line, and it got a little better. As soon as McCoy came back, we didn't protect him. The Jets brought him back, and McCoy goes down again, and then we're scrambling. Because what we were doing, except for that brief period where we had that backup center in 24, we were trying to slide guards in because they could play center, and it was not working. It was horrific. Last year, we signed Clapp to take care of that. He gets hurt and knocked out for the season before we get out of training camp. We make the brilliant, props to Mickey, trade for Fortner, giving them Saunders. That very fortuitous move. He came in and played well when we lost McCoy. Played so well, it looks like he's now the starting center in Carolina, which leaves that hole open again. Now, in Phoenix a couple of days ago, Kellen Moore alluded to, we've got some guards that are able to come in the center. That's nice. That's a total of break glass in case of emergency situation during the game. Fine. However, for extended periods of time, I need them to get the backup center. I don't know if you can really do it in free agency, what's left there. So you're probably talking trade or draft. In the draft, day 2, probably floating into the 4th round. Lou, Hecht, Jagger, Burton. There are guys there. There are going to be rookies who NFL ready in a way, I think is the way to put it. They're not the guy you're going to draft and go, oh yeah, he's my starting center, no problem. I think they're the guys you're going to draft and go, they're pretty good. It's incumbent on the team to get them ready through the offseason so that they can step in the situations we're talking about, and you can get a Luke Fortner out the draft. Because I think a lot of NFL teams think that's possible. Hopefully the Saints are one of them. Hopefully they figure out who they are, and hopefully we get them in on. I don't know if you're going to do it in day 2. You might have to, depending on how things shake out. But I need receivers before I need the backup center on day 1 and day 2. Well, not day 1. That's not even in the conversation, but day 2. But early in day 3, you got those early pick. You're going to have to think about it. You're going to have to pin something down because I think that's the only way it's going to go. And that's really a priority for me. Now, talking about day 2, guard. We know Ione's the top guy in the first round, and unless we want to take him at 8 or trade down, which the Saints never do, he's not really on the board. Pregnon could come into play early in the second if he doesn't sneak into the first round, which he could. But you've got Basantis, you've got Campbell, you've got Stevens. There's a again, it's sort of like that center position we were just talking about. Probably some third round guys, maybe sneaking very early into day three, who are NFL ready in the sense of no, they're not Ione or Pregnon or probably Basantis. A lot of people are saying he is. NFL ready, can show up day one and start for you, but they could be ready if they're developed correctly. Once you get them into OTAs and move them through, they'll be ready to step in a pinch, be able to help out, give you some depth. To me, right now, I think healthy McCoy, both our tackles and David Edwards, at any given point in the game when you get one-on-ones with offensive linemen, more times than not, they're going to win. I can't say the same thing about Cesar Ruiz. So in my mind, you're also looking to draft someone that hopefully can challenge him this year if he's got to step it up, especially in run blocking. We brought Radens back, which thank God we did that. He's going to add, and he can play tackle also, so a swing lineman and can back up basically for the positions you have on the field if you need him to. I would let him make a run at that right guard spot too. When you get to backups outside of center, I think that's the other thing and where this guard center combination that we're looking to get strengthens your depth, but you're going to have to look at tackle also. And I do know the Saints have brought in some tackles in their and no names I recognize, to be honest with you, but at least bringing some guys in, so kind of makes me think that yeah, they're recognizing a Sim Richards may not be the answer to back up both tackles, kind of like we had to do last year. And there's Truss and Sherman and Simpkins. They may all play a role in this some kind of way. And have to acknowledge, and I'll leave you with this, as far as those guys, especially Richards and Truss, and Fortner to a degree, they all showed up basically as we were about to kick the season off. It felt like they were walking in the locker room to meet the team right before the Cardinals game. And some of the other linemen were brought in at various times during the season. Some were undrafted guys who are already here. That's like the Kilties and the Wesley and all. So you had a mixed bag. But the thing is, our coaching staff was in place later, I guess you could say, because of the fact we had to wait for Philly to win the Super Bowl before we could hire Kellen Moore and get the staff out. So I think they did a fantastic job in a much shorter offseason period than you would like. Well, this year, all those guys we just mentioned have been in now, almost for a full year, if not a full year. The coaching staff is now starting off when the season ends, and we kept that staff largely intact. So there's a lot of things going here that I don't want to overreact to the need of we've got to beef up and improve the offensive line at the guard position in depth, although I think we do. But I also have to acknowledge all that process that we were just talking about that is now normalized. Now we're having a normal offseason with those guys, and all of them were here by the end of the season. There may be a little more growth or potential or possible depth out of that group than I'm giving them credit for. So I acknowledge that. But I still think you've got to come out of this draft with some help on the interior if you need it immediately, and some depth on the outside tackles behind to back up Banks and Fuaga. Defensive side, not much different than the offensive side of the depth charts. A couple rooms that are really, really solid right now, and a couple that are going to need some work. Now, real quickly, as a reminder, because I have to remind myself a lot when I'm talking about the defense, this fact. The Staley style offense, in the vein of Vic Fangio and various other coordinators around the NFL, the depth chart kind of isn't quite cut and dry like it was, say, under the Dennis Allen depth chart when we were running a base 4-3 or 4-2-5 defense. This is a little more interior defensive lineman as opposed to nose guard slash defensive tackle that you can shoehorn in. You know, not really outside linebackers. They're defensive edge. Cornerbacks and safeties generally are more or less correct in linebackers, off the ball linebackers, but even they can get a little muddled as far as their abilities because they are asked to do not only different things from their position, but moving around in the defense where a linebacker, think Demario Davis last year, sometimes he was a linebacker, sometimes he was an edge rusher, etc. So whether you want to call them hybrid players or multifunctional or whatever phrase you want to use, is we have to keep in mind that even though we're calling someone defensive edge or defensive end, say Chase Young, that no longer tight as a job description as defensive end in Dennis Allen's defense was. The reason why I bring that up is versatility is what we're talking about here. It is very key in the players involved. And so we always have to keep that in mind when we're talking about the defensive players in the way that Brandon Staley wants to use them. Now, getting into the rooms that are in good shape, linebacker, you brought in Ellis, you have Werner and Stutzman, and I have a slash between their names because I truly believe everybody, not everybody, most people consider Werner the starter. And a lot of us, me included here, believe that Stutzman is primed to take that job and become the starter. I'm not sure what happens to Werner at that point. But it's a room where on paper right now, I don't think you're really worried about adding to in the draft. And definitely not, I don't believe in free agency, what's left in that pool. However, Sonny Styles shows up there at 8. You got to think hard, depending on who the 7 picks were in front of us. Arvell Reese shows up there. He's a guy that a lot of the talk around the NFL is will he off the ball or is he an edge? And here's where the Brandon Staley philosophy comes in. He doesn't really care. He wants good football players, and he's going to figure out ways to utilize them and get production out of them, sort of like he did with Isaiah Stalbert, because he's listed with the linebackers, but in his limited playing time as a defensive player last year, he lined up an awful lot as an edge rusher. So, bit of a hybrid there, and I could see Reese fitting into that. I could see Rodriguez in the second round sitting there, and the Saints go, he's just too good to pass up. So, I do believe there are spots, especially 42 being a big one, where there's some linebackers floating around. And the Saints would go, our linebacker room is good, but that guy is just too good to pass up, and we'll bring him in. Which moves us to the safety room. Pretty much the same. It's almost the same situation, I believe, as the linebacker room. You have 5 guys that all coming back from last year, even though Blackman was only able to play in 1 game before his injury. But they all fit. They know what they're doing. They're all shown some of that versatility that Brandon Staley wants. Burgess has played the star position previously with the Rams and the Chargers when Staley was there, and we just brought him back last week. Special team ability and very familiar with this style of defense. But this is the same situation where, and especially at safety slash defensive back in this draft, it seems to be kind of deep with some really, really good football players. And at any given point, I can see, we know about Caleb Downs and Thieneman from Oregon, top 2 safeties, and they are both incredible football players that can play anywhere in the defensive backfield and would fit this scheme like a glove. But even as you move down further in the draft, you're going to keep coming up with safety, since we're talking about the safety room, or players who played multi-positions. In Jason Kilgore for South Carolina comes to mind here. Played a lot of multiple positions in his time in college. And if you go look him up, some draft sites list him as a safety and some as a cornerback. So I think this is another room where, Downs falls at 8. They've got to sit there and think hard about what they want to do at this position. So conceivably, you can come to some point in the draft where we do draft a safety sort of like the linebacker room, where that football player is just too good to pass up right here. He fits what we want to do. Howden and Burgess may be the two that would be in danger of a roster spot if that happens. And when you look at the rest of the depth chart, and we're going to break down cornerback room and the defensive line as a whole, two question mark areas, and that both need to be addressed in the draft, but kind of for different reasons. The cornerback room, when we break it down, you're going to see we just don't have enough really good football players in that room right now, and that needs to absolutely be addressed. And on the defensive line, whether you're talking edge or interior, we need to add another true impact defensive lineman, whether it's on the edge or the interior, because when you look at what we have, Young is truly impact, and you have a Granderson and a few other guys who are really, really good. But overall, that defensive line, and we all know it, needs to be retooled and a little more juice added to it. So you can look right there and see that when you get to the cornerback room, it's a little bit of a feeling of the wide receiver room. Very good with your top two, McKinstry and Riley. But next name you can come up with is Yadam. And Yadam did not play well at all last year. Because you really only have three other names that are kind of listed as true corners. Rejon Wright, Price, and Beenum. None of them played last year on the active roster. They are, they're practice squad guys. There's your cornerback room. Suddenly makes clear why there was top 30 interest in Mansour Delane, right? Who now this brings up an interesting point of I think that's more of a possibility than we even thought of, because you stop and think Delane and likely going to be your top corner. It may not quite happen his rookie year, but it's in the cards. He's that kind of guy. McKinstry's really turned it on last year, especially at the end of the year, was playing exceptionally well. So you'd have two top corners. Riley, now there's a good chance you would be looking at him as kind of that inside role somewhat, but still with the ability to play outside. And it was kind of the intention when we drafted him, that he could move around in that secondary, and especially between inside and outside as a corner. Man, all of a sudden your room is looking very, very tight in that situation. He'd be the only one you'd consider at 8. Right now, it kind of feels like McCoy from Tennessee and Terrell from Clemson are your other two likely top corners going in the first round, but you've got possibilities day 2 that could slide into day 1. And again, it's like receiver. It's almost like cornerback and receiver mirror each other, and what the Saints have in their rooms and what the draft is going to provide, because you've got a lot of potentially really, really good corners in this draft. So like I said, some of the day 2 guys that could sneak into day 1, and it's just a limited list, so I don't have to go through all of them. But it says from South Carolina, Pons from Indiana, Johnson, San Diego State, Hood from Tennessee, Scott from Miami. Even some guys looking at day 3 that might sneak in day 2 is Lee from A&M, Davis from Washington, Deming from Stephen F. Austin, Kilgore from South Carolina, who is really one of the most diverse out of this group that's played a lot of different positions in the secondary in his college career. Neal at Arkansas. So again, partial list. It can go way deeper than this. I don't see any way how we're not coming out of this draft with a cornerback. I just don't know how they're feeling about these guys, where they're thinking about putting them. And to mention that, look, if you were going to wait to the second round of free agency after the draft to go address corner with some of the veterans floating around out there, there's a lot of them. So much so that I don't think, unless you really looking for a top guy, that I don't think it's going to cost you a whole lot. And it's something we've always done in the past. And we did it with Yedem his first go around when he was here, when he actually played better. You know, even last year, Michael Davis would kind of, I think he was brought on mostly for special teams, and ended up we were using him at corner late in the season and getting some decent plays out of him. So this isn't a priority. It's not a concern. Just historically, the Saints, for the most part, we've had a few that just totally pooped the bed. But for the most part, they've been pretty good about keeping that cornerback room depth-wise solid, especially when they have a couple of guys up top that are good. And we do have two, but we only have two. Kind of a similar conversation at edge. Because when you're talking about the defensive line, I think we're mostly solid there. But like I said earlier, I think you're just kind of lacking some impact players. Love Young. Young is really fit into this defense. If as long as we can keep him healthy and we get what we got out of him last year when he showed up healthy, he was a dominant force. And Granderson played very, very well. It's kind of splitting time with Cam Jordan somewhat. More of that in a minute. But I think more than capable of taking over more of that role if that's the route that we have to go. Rumpf brought him back, which was a move I expected. He's another guy that's been with Staley before he even showed up here. Just a solid guy. Did make a few plays for us last year, but he's not going to make a ton of them. But he's a good depth piece to come in there, kind of handle that defensive edge, and gives you a lot of the different functions you need from there. He can rush the passer a little bit. He can play the run a little bit. He can even drop a little bit and help you there. And he's a backup. It's a backup role, and that's perfectly fine because he does that very well. So you need guys like this. The definition of a Jimmy and Joe is going to come in and give you 110% and keep it together at that spot until you get back in the rotation or whatever happens where, your impact players start coming back in the game. After that, Diggs, and probably the fourth guy right now. We have a couple floating around on the practice squad, but even that's where Diggs, being a seventh round pick, did get some playing time, but majority of the time, he was a practice squad guy too. So I think you're going to need some help after you look at the first four of those names. Bringing back Cam Jordan, I think might still be in the cards. We don't know, and probably won't know till well after the draft, getting closer to June more than likely. One way or the other, how that's going to pan out, because it looks like he's going to have to sit and wait till that second round of free agency that normally kicks off. That being said, you're still going to have to dip into the draft and get some guys. But there's where it gets interesting, because as a whole on the defensive line, they need another impact player there. And Jordan played like an impact player last year, and I don't see any reason why you can't get that one more season out of him in this defense. But even so, look, at number 8, Bailey and Bain, and probably Arvell Reese, as far as you're talking about from the D line and bringing some impact. There's going to be 3 of them sitting there. Even on the interior, if you don't bring the impact on the edge, but you can find that guy, even if he's an impact run stopper and just gives you enough to be able to be on the field in passing situations, sort of like Devin Gottschall was in prime of his career, no issue with that whatsoever. That is going to help this defense. And those guys are there. Now, probably day 2. Not so long ago, a few weeks ago, there was talk of 5 or 6 defensive interior guys going in the first round. That's quietly died down. Like Hunter for Texas Tech being an example. Everybody after Mobile was like, oh, he's definitely a first rounder. Now you're kind of seeing that slide back a little bit. I think in the interior, outside of the top guys, those 5 or 6, however they fall out, it is really deep in players that can help you. Put it that way. May not be the starter and taking 60% of the snaps on your defensive line. They're going to be able to come in and help you, be able to fill in those spots where I think your defensive line, the one drawback is there's some age and there's some uncertainty because of it up there. Bringing in some of these younger guys that can get in there and take meaningful NFL snaps and produce numbers. This draft seems to, day 2, day 3, there's going to be some in there. On the edge, kind of the same thing. Like we said, we've got those top end impact players. 3 we mentioned. Messidor is probably going to be in the first round and in that conversation, but you're going to start sliding into day 2. Tucker, Lawrence. Nobody talks about Height, who played opposite of Bailey at Texas Tech, who, looking at his draft stuff, almost as good as pass rush and may actually be the better run defender. He's sitting there with a day 2 grade. So I don't know if you are looking, and you're not looking, I don't believe, at the interior at 8, but if you're looking at the edge, but if you are, there almost certainly going to be an impact player, one of those three. I can't see all three of them being drafted before us. So you do have that option. Tying that in with cornerback and receiver, now you're pushing those two down a little further, and they're both big needs. But I think it's doable if you want to do that gamble. If you want to bring the impact player in at 8 on the defensive line, in this case, it would almost have to certainly be the edge. So just kind of trying to wrap everything up here. There's a lot of moving parts in this draft for the Saints. All boils down to where you're starting at 8. But I think of the four kind of those position rooms I'm talking about, I think wide receivers you can't go cheap at receiver. You can't take those long shots. You have to find somebody. And I really feel like it's going to have to be at 8 or 42. You might be pushing it at 73. And 8 has to be an impact player. So if you don't get Tate or Lemon, or if they don't think Tyson is the guy at 8, you still need an impact player. Now you're going to be looking at edge, possibly corner, depending on what happens. But I think all three of those positions need to be addressed by 73. The outlier being on the offensive line, especially a guard. If you're at any point in those three picks coming up with a Pregnon at 42, you're not going to get, I don't believe, a Pregnon anywhere else in that draft. If you pass on Bell, you likely could still push the limit at 73 and say it's at Hurst. And I think you're still improving the team. You're still the objective stated goal of building around Tyler Shough. First time here, you like what you saw, please like, share, subscribe, hit all the buttons. Algorithm loves that. We'll just keep looking. We've got about 3 weeks left to go in the draft. Just keep going down that path and kind of seeing where everything lays. I really wish we were getting more news on some of the top 30 guys that are coming from the Saints. That would give us an indication, but I'm guessing that's why we're not hearing about it, because they're not trying to tip their hand, and I get that too. So we'll just read the tea leaves between now and then and get us prepared for the draft as we can be. So till I see you next time, I'm Tim. Peace out and who dat.